Hey, Elizabeth. Hi. Thanks for making time for this session today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So today's discussion is about managing churn. And before we go ahead and dig into how to save churn, mitigate, and so on and so forth, Elizabeth, if you could take some time and introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure, thank you. I'm a managing partner with Go-to-Market Advisors, and I also lead our customer success practice. And so a little bit about Go-to-Market Advisors, we diagnose and help to resolve any go-to-market issues. And so this is from sales, marketing through to obviously customer success and everything that falls under customer success. So onboarding, adoption, account management, all of those things. So a little bit about my history, just in background in customer success. So I originally actually started out in sales. And while I was at Salesforce, I got introduced to the world of customer success. And I really fell in love with it. So working with clients, helping them to be successful with their goals through the product adoption and usage of the various Salesforce products. And then I ended up, really identifying customer success as, what could be the profit center and really what's going to drive revenue for organizations. And so that kind of carried me through from being a customer success manager to leading customer success teams as VP of CS. And then I eventually made my way into consulting. And so now here I am and really excited to talk about churn, one of my favorite topics.
Equally excited here, Elizabeth. All right, now that you have mentioned churn, I would go ahead and venture into the dreaded questions that we CSMs really don't like to face. So the first one is that churn is not something that we want to deal with. Any CSM or the CS lead doesn't want to deal with, but we do deal with it month in, quarter, yearly. So the first step, of course, is to identifying. So as a CS leader or as CSMs, what triggers should be in place to identify those churns to begin with?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of different categories for looking at churn, leading and lagging indicators for churn, and some of those triggers. So first off is product adoption. And sometimes product adoption can kind of be this wide and a little bit nebulous topic around, oh, we have to drive product adoption. But what does that mean for your organization? What does product adoption success look like? Is it the average amount of daily active users, monthly active users? Are there certain feature sets that make your product really sticky? And so if that's the case, then and you identify that if these particular features aren't adopted, then that tends to drive churn, then that should certainly be a trigger. So when we think about product adoption, we really need to think about, okay, well, what does success look like for our clients and what helps that drive towards their ultimate goals that they have by leveraging whatever product or service there is. So that's one thing. The other side is relationships. And so this is things like, are we single threaded? Do we not have multiple relationships across the account? And executive relationships and decision-making relationships within the client organization. When we're single-threaded, that is a big warning sign for me, because if you lose that, champion or main point of contact, then you're, kind of flying blind in the account and you don't have anyone to advocate internally. So that's a big one for me. The other one is around customer satisfaction. And so we can pull that through, whether it's CSAT scores, so customer satisfaction scores, NPS scores, customer effort scores, and then of course, customer feedback. So direct customer feedback. So if we hear from customers that they are unhappy, they're dissatisfied, they've had outstanding support tickets, a lot of outages, whatever the case may be, maybe the product hasn't delivered on the promise that was, told to them during the sales cycle. And the other thing I would listen for as well is, in my experience, sometimes the customers that seem unhappy aren't necessarily, churn risks. They can actually be your best customers because they've adopted a lot of your product and they're pushing it to the next level. So I think it's really, really important to listen to the feedback, do root cause analysis of the feedback, and identify, okay, is it that they want to do more because they've sort of, hit the limits of the product, and so now they've become a really great resource for product feedback, or is this something that is really a true churn risk if we don't address? So I think it's really important to listen and really dig into that feedback and do some of that root cause analysis. A couple other things as well as go live. So if they didn't achieve go live, or if they achieved go live and then they fell off the usage and the engagement, path, then that's, of course, another churn risk flag that I certainly want to be alerted to.
Yeah, I think you've covered every possible reason that we as a should be aware about here. But specifically, what struck me is the second point that you mentioned, where being blind, not having more than one point of contacts horizontally as well as vertically. Even internally in Smart Carrot, Prithvi, our team lead and founder of the company, he mentions this to us very frequently, that having just one champion is a bad idea. Especially when it comes to change management, broaden your horizons. So I think, yes, spot on that one. And now that you have, described feedback a little more in depth, so I'll continue on that thread. As part of CSATs and other surveys that you take, maybe during the onboarding or post onboarding, or bad luck if customer has already churned, then how much role of this data analysis and having that customer feedback plays in understanding the reason of churn?
Yeah, so it's a very, very important reason for looking at churn and identifying churn. So when I look at customer SAT scores or NPS, one thing that I look at too is where are they in their customer journey? So I think a mistake that a lot of organizations make is that they send out customer surveys at very I guess at times that don't really make sense to the customer's operational rhythm, to where they are in their customer journey. So for example, if you have a 90-day onboarding process, then okay, maybe day 30 isn't the time to send out a survey that's about, oh, how are you happy, or how are you feeling about the product? Things of that nature, depending on how you word it. So I think really the key is to map when customer surveys are map when they are sent out to where customers are in their journey. And so if you have, cohorts of customers, that's one way to do it. The easy way is to do a 30, 60, 90, 120, 365, but that's not really effective. And it can give some false positives and some false negatives. And also when companies address it in that fashion, people will tune out the surveys. So then you don't get the response rate. So I think it's really, really important to do those customer satisfaction surveys, to do voice of the customer and talk to customers directly. But I think we need to be methodical about how and when we do it, as opposed to just kind of having a blanket, what's easy for us. Of course, 30, 60, 90, or whatever that cadence is easy for us internally, but not so much for the customer. So we have to kind of think about it from the customer lens. And so, it's certainly an important data point, but I like to call that out as sort of a, beware of the false positives, false negatives, and survey fatigue when it comes to CSAT. In terms of just to dig into the data piece a little bit further, I think it's also really important to look at quantitative data and qualitative data and really make sure that you're looking at what trends the data is telling you, so you can do root cause analysis. So if you look back at your churn over the last quarter, the last year, you're looking at, okay, are there trends in the product usage? Are there trends in certain customer verticals and segmentation? We've seen some changes this year based on the economic downturn. We've seen some companies have some pretty significant changes in who their ICP is and who their ideal personas are within the verticals and companies that they're working with. And so we really need to track that data and then pull in direct feedback from customers to validate hypothesis, add that voice of the customer. And so I think that's, a holistic approach is really important when it comes to analyzing data for churn.
Right. This part where you mentioned that do not have so many surveys that your customers tire out and they just block your surveys. So continuing on that one, because we have had customers where I personally deal with them and they experience the same thing. They're sending out onboarding surveys and they're not getting enough responses. They're sending out to 100, 150 customers, but 20 of them reply. So they're not obviously very happy with the way it has turned out. So the next question is that, of course, feedback plays a very important role. It doesn't just define the customer journey, but also sometimes the product journey, because what your customers are expecting is hopefully you'll build into the product. But if you want to have a structured feedback, how should it be put into the CS framework so that you not just understand churn, but you also improve your customer journey?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. So one, going back to what I mentioned earlier about timing surveys so that they are aligned to certain milestones in the customer journey. But I think the other thing is looking at your surveys and categorizing them as you get results back. So, NPS has a pretty bad rap with some people. I've seen NPS, as one example, work really well and work really poorly. Where I've seen it work really well, did this at a former organization that I was a CS leader for, is that we took the results and we categorized them into, okay, is the feedback based on usability? Is it based on customer service? What is the categories that's driving whether it's the negative, neutral, or positive responses that we're getting? Because then we can start doing that root cause analysis and say, okay, based on now how we're slicing and dicing the customer feedback, we can now see what's the driver of positive sentiment, negative sentiment, and then you can start making decisions based on that feedback. And the other thing is respond to your customers. So like if you get, an NPS response, and particularly if they take the time to write any comments and respond to them. And those that respond, I often see, well, we respond to the negative, but these customers are happy, so we're not going to respond to them because they're fine. That's also a mistake. So we really need to make sure that we close that feedback loop. And whether it's to get more context, to simply thank them, that's really important too.
Yeah. So continuing on this one, because this is an interesting one where you receive responses and you're just looking at an average, maybe, oh, okay, my NPS on an average looks good, so maybe I don't have to actually go through each response. But in CS, in our fraternity, being proactive is the only way forward. You have to be a couple of steps ahead of your customers. So how crucial do you see that being proactive is in identifying churn and hopefully preventing it?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important when it comes to identifying and certainly preventing churn. And the other thing that I would say is that we need to be proactive with a purpose and not proactive just to check a box. So, what I mean by that is that sometimes we'll set up these customer engagement frameworks and these customer engagement cadences. And it's really based, again, on internally what works for us operationally, as opposed to, okay, well, let's think again of the milestones. So you have a customer, they go through onboarding, they achieve go live, and then you put them in a box of, okay, well, now I'm going to engage with them monthly or quarterly because they fit in this customer segment, and that's what we've established. That's not good enough in some cases. For PLG, and it's more of a one-to-many, that that's a different approach. But when it's clients that require some one-to-one engagement, consider again their customer journey and what they're going through for change management. So they come out of onboarding, they've had all of this high touch, and then all of a sudden they get bumped to a quarterly approach. Now, if we think about change management, that go live is just part of it. And so proactively, what we should be doing is saying, okay, in order to make sure that you continue this adoption path, maybe what's best is for the first 2 months, we have bi-weekly calls. And I'm going to, on those weeks that we're not talking, I'm going to sprinkle some videos or whatever the case may be. And then we move to quarterly or whatever the case is for that customer. And so that's kind of what I mean by be proactive with a purpose, is that we really need to think about, again, the customer journey and what they need in order to adopt the product, enable them to be successful, and make sure that we are giving them what they need from a one-to-one and a one-to-many touch. So there's a lot I could continue talking about on that, but I'll pause to see if you have any questions before I continue.
No, I think the line that you mentioned, that proactive with a purpose, I think I can keep that in the video's line, that hashtag proactive with a purpose. That's very catchy.
Yeah, but it's true. It's I just see sometimes there's like, let's check this box, but no, that just isn't good enough.
No, it certainly does not, especially when you have already identified that this might probably not be the customer that would successfully see the value of your product. Because in the answer to this one, Elizabeth, you've mentioned onboarding a couple of times here, and in our experience as CSMs or anything that we read, a lot of it is written on onboarding. Your time to value is a very important CS metric that everybody tracks. It could be, like you mentioned, 90 days, 30 days, or as short as 15 days. So given that it's such an important customer journey phase, so in your experience, what are some best practices to mitigate churn at this point? Because if the customer hasn't reached TTV or isn't seeing value, they are going to churn.
Right. So, I love this question because I love talking about the sales to CS handoff, but even before that handoff and onboarding begins, there really needs to be alignment between sales and customer success. And so when we look at the go-to-market motion and we look at cross-team collaboration, there really needs to be alignment in terms of the messaging that sales gives about onboarding, and using it as a selling point. So, we once you decide to go with us and the sale is closed, then you have this great team that's going to help you with the onboarding, the change management, but also making sure that we're getting forecasts from the sales team as well, so that we know what is coming and we have the resources in place in order to make sure that we have timely responses when customers are closing and coming over to onboarding and customer success. Additionally to that, the handoff is so important, and it's not just as simple as saying, okay, well, we'll do an email introduction. There really needs to be time frames. So 1 business day, that's what I give it. And I know that I've had some people kind of be like, oh my gosh, Elizabeth, that's not realistic to do 1 business day. Well, that has to be built into the capacity and the framework, because we need to make sure that we capitalize on that momentum. And so the sale closes, and within 1 business day, having that email go out that introduces the customer and that's all of the stakeholders to the customer success manager, if there's an onboarding specialist, whatever that team is, because we don't want buyer's remorse to creep in, which can creep in really, really quickly. Yes. And the other thing is that when we do that introduction, the other mistake I often see is that the intro is to whoever the main point of contact is on sort of the, technical implementation side, whoever's going to be that main point of contact. But in order to make sure that we stay multi-threaded, that introduction should include the decision maker and whoever's going to be, kind of the point person for onboarding. So then we can maintain that engagement. And I think that's also up to the sales team to help set that expectation with the individuals that they're working with through the sales cycle. And of course, there's more past the introduction, but I'll pause there for questions.
No. I relate to every bit that you say, because it gets tricky. Sales set expectations, and if they're not clearly communicated that this is what the customer is looking for in the onboarding, it could derail the process very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And then once you get that introduction, then you can start that onboarding motion and start tracking time to go live. And it's really important to have, goals for time to go live. And then time to value. So the other thing too is making sure that we're defining what time to value is. So what is first value and what is full value? And ideally, you're also doing that with the executive decision maker level, as well as that frontline level, the main point of contact that you're working with. So for example, it could be to a CSM, it could be, okay, the first, point of value for me is that all of my customer data is consolidated in one place. And now I can actually have dashboards that will help me decide my day to day and make decisions. So that's time to value at one level. But from the decision maker, the executive point of view, it could be, oh, well, my first time to value or point of value is that I have access to renewal forecasting, to expansion forecasting, that I can actually use this data now to drive my decisions, to create forecasts for the next board meeting. And so again, we really need to think about, okay, it's not just stakeholder and multi-threading just for the sake of talking to different people. It's identifying what's important to them. And so if you can, throughout onboarding and then after coming out of onboarding, define those with each of the stakeholders, then you're going to really have multiple advocates at multiple levels.
This has been enlightening for me. And that's the right word for this, because when we say TTV in general, when we are having discussions, we generally focus on one TTV that's given probably by the CSMs or the CS lead. That if I'm able to see, like you mentioned, for example, the dashboard, that's it. We've achieved that. And I, as CSM, I'm very happy. I delivered it before time. This looks good. But guess what? The decision makers are different people and their expectations are definitely different. So having this view and realizing that you have more than one TTV is probably a lot more important than I had realized earlier. Great, Mama. Yeah. So the next, we've talked extensively about adoption, onboarding, and once you've completed and you have hopefully delivered at least one TTV, and you have now entered your adoption. So there's a lot of change management happening once the onboarding closes, like you mentioned earlier. So in this phase where customers have a lot of high touch and now it's going to become digital touch or low touch, what are some flags to spot that customer might be heading for a churn, hopefully in next 6 months or 3 months?
Yeah, so one of the things that I watch for, and this goes back to the handoff as well, is that if there is a handoff and it becomes clear that the people that are implementing the product are very disgruntled, and so they weren't part of the evaluation process. They were basically told, okay, we bought this platform or this tool, whatever the case is, and now you have to implement it and adopt it in your workflow. And change is hard. We know that. People get kind of stuck in their ways, or they have their workflows. Whatever the case is of what kind of they're attached to in their current state. And so when you can kind of sense that tension, that's a red flag for me, because then that tells me, all right, the client side internally hasn't addressed the change management. So that's a huge one. And they might be going through the motions because their boss told them that, okay, you need to get this up and running, but that doesn't mean they're actually going to adopt it. And they may have plans to even say, oh, well, yeah, I did this, but, it doesn't work or whatever, so you really have to pay attention to those things and make sure you don't have a detractor, not for the fault of what you've done, but because the client side hasn't had that internal communication. And so one thing in the onboarding phase that I like to do, and this is for, of course, like larger, more complex onboarding or anything that takes more than a couple of weeks to onboard, is to do a technical kickoff and a business kickoff, because what somebody is interested in, what an executive is interested in, and what the person that's going to be doing the technical implementation is interested in can be quite different. And so we need to make sure that we're bridging that gap But we also need to make sure that we're understanding those two audiences and seeing if there's any disconnects. And if there are, that's a warning for me that, okay, this could be heading to a potentially unhealthy customer. And so, those are things that cannot always be as obvious right away. And then, of course, the more obvious ones are they don't attend onboarding calls. They become unresponsive. You hit go live, but then usage is non-existent. Those are some of the more obvious ones. But that dynamic in the beginning of implementation is super important to watch for.
Right. I agree. And the points that you're mentioning, Elizabeth, absolutely spot on, I must really say, because while you're saying all of that, I can actually go back and just recollect different customer journeys and realize what had gone wrong or what could have been better. And these points definitely struck the right chord. So So Elizabeth, here, this one is about short-term strategies, because it could be that a CS team is handling a large portfolio where they're handling maybe upwards of 100, 150, even 200 clients. So when you're holding a portfolio as huge as that, and what can be some short-term strategies that CS teams can put together to prevent and forecast churn in such scenarios?
Yeah, so I think, and you said a key word there, the CS team, and I would even go as far to say the go-to-market team is being responsible for this. And this is looking at the past to help predict the future. So one of the things that you should be doing in the short term and the long term, so on a monthly, quarterly, and then an annual basis, is looking at your historical data and identifying churn trends as well as renewal trends. So what do unsuccessful customers look like that end up churning? What do successful customers look like that end up renewing and growing as well? And so, it is often the case that if you look to the past, that will help to predict your future, but CSMs can't go, do that alone. That needs to be something, whether it's the ops team, the data team, they need support in order to be able to really do that data analysis. The other thing is customer segmentation analysis. So this can be kind of a quick way to start identifying where you might have churn problems and prioritize. So if we do customer segmentation analysis based on cohort, vertical, different product lines, whatever the case may be, then we can start saying, all right, now that we've done this analysis, now I've identified my churn risk versus my healthy customers, and now I can start to prioritize. And so as a CS team, and so as a CS leader, you help your CSMs to prioritize, because like you said, if it's 150 to 200 clients, or sometimes even more, you can't engage with all of those customers on a one-to-one basis. And so then you can start to prioritize, all right, who gets that one-to-one engagement? And some of these other customers, all right, let's collaborate with marketing. And so we can put some customer marketing strategies in place so that we can address, this bucket of customers as well. And so that's why I said the go-to-market team, not just the CS team, because really that, in order to prevent churn and identify churn, it is a team sport. The prioritization is really a huge thing. Now, short-term strategies of what a CSM, can do, I don't want to say on their own, but what they can really drive is leveraging existing relationships that they have, that is within their organization and a client account. So what I mean by that is, if I have this group of customers that are a churn risk, I'm going to look at my book of business, and I'm going to say, all right, I've identified that these customers have relationships with these individuals in my organization. And so we do relationship mapping and we do stakeholder mapping. And then we can try and get in front of the right people or get introductions to the right people, because then if you can get to that point, that gives you a fighting chance to build the business case, to do root cause analysis to understand why they are a churn risk, why they're not happy. And that is something that, if that's approached again as a team approach, then that gives a CSM a fighting chance for saving the account.
Yeah, it's important that you mention that it's a team sport. very often when you see that, oh, there's a dedicated team called as customer success. So anything and everything, let's catch those guys. But like you mentioned, Peter, it's important that the whole team comes together. Your go-to-market team, your sales team, your product team, customer support, everybody plays a crucial role. Yeah. This is our last question, Elizabeth, and it's an important one close to my heart, which is when you have your favorite customers who have been with you for a long time, you like doing their QBRs, you like doing their MBRs, but you're seeing that it's not going where you thought that they should go in next 6 months, probably at the risk of churn. So this last one is, how do I prevent those really precious customers? Because they potentially are marketers. They'll go out and sell our products to their circle. So how do I prevent those kind of churns?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because sometimes what you'll see happen, and this, can happen in sales, it can happen in customer success, is that you become friends with your main point of contact, and that can, give you a false sense of security. And it can also mean that it's difficult to give tough love or feedback or to ask the hard questions. So I think, one of the ways in order to make sure that conversations stay on point and that we position ourselves to have those honest conversations is to always make sure that, we understand what our main point of contact, what all of our stakeholders, what their goals are for this quarter. What are they being measured on? How does that tie into the overall business goals? And to quantify that as much as possible. Because then if you have a success plan in place, I say if, but hopefully you do. If you have that in place, and if you start to see that their usage, their results are going off the rails, you can pull it back to their goals and what they're trying to accomplish. And so if it is going off the rails, the conversation doesn't become about their performance. It becomes about, okay, well, here's what I'm seeing. We're behind on this KPI. And, is this still a priority? At the beginning of the quarter, we identified that this was the goal. Has anything changed? I think discovery is a huge skill for customer success managers to have. When oftentimes when people talk about discovery, it's in relation to sales. It's just as important for customer success, because in those instances, you can, again, go back to what the goals are that you talked about, and then, look at, okay, now I need to do discovery. Now I need to do some diagnosing of what's happening here. And you make it again about the goals and not about the individual's performance. The other thing as well is, if you have found yourself that you're in the position that you've become single-threaded and your only contact is this person, and you see, it's kind of going off the rails, there's some churn signs, then I would ask for, as a CSM, I would say, typically at this stage, we would involve, this stakeholder and this stakeholder to do an executive business review. Can you introduce me and see if if they're willing to give you an introduction? If they're not, then I leverage other people in my organization. So maybe I have my CS leader reach out to their CS leader and open a dialogue. Because what we need to remember as CSMs is that, yes, I'm accountable for this account, but I don't own the relationship. The organization, my company does. And we have some accountability to their company, not just the stakeholder we're working with, that we're driving value. So I think we have to remember that is that, yes, we need to maintain those relationships. We need to be very diplomatic if we're going kind of outside that realm. But we really need to think about, at the end of the day, what is the goal here? So that would be one of the top things that I would keep an eye and sort of think through.
I cannot tell you how insightful and exciting this whole discussion had been. I have no clue how the time passed and how I have run out of questions. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for making time for this one. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. It was a great discussion and happy to join.
Yeah. See you again, hopefully soon next time. Thank you.